Thank you. Just before I came over here, I was talking to Howard Kissel, former drama critic for the Daily News, and Howard's a member of the New York Drama Critics Circle. And an issue has come up that the drama critics are concerned about that I think you guys can address. They have formed a committee, of which Howard is the chairman, so we call it the Kissel Commission, to protest the wrenching out of context critics' quotes from their reviews to be used in advertisements. Linda Weiner, for example, gave a terrible review to a musical about Walmart called Walmartopia, and they took her quote and made it look like a rave review for the show, and it ran above the title of the play in the New York Times. And the producers of Grease took a whole stack of terrible reviews and made them look like good reviews in an ad that they ran in the New York Times. So I'm curious, I'll start with you, Anne. What do you think is fair game when you're going through a list of reviews that you can take and play around with, perhaps to make a review sound better than it really is?
I'm not sure that I have a specific rule book as it comes to that. I will say that I think that the public has grown a lot savvier in terms of the degree to which they believe the quotes and ads, which may or may not be the end result of this problem that you're talking about. But when you do, and Joseph can probably elaborate on this part further, when you do focus groups with theater audiences, many times they'll say flat out, you shouldn't even bother putting in a quote in the ad because I don't believe it. And particularly when you go on a national tour, you find that you hear that feedback a lot more.
And yet, Joseph, I continue to see, though, in the New York Times every Sunday, full-page ads full of quotes from the critics. Do they still have value?
To a certain degree. What it does is for consumers, they're very wary of them, but they look at the source. They try and figure out, is it just ... fascinating ... or is it a whole, they're actually taking a whole phrase. If they're actually taking a whole phrase, it'll give it a little more credence to them. But they're very, very wary. Consumers just feel like, this has been so abused again and again that critics' voices have actually become, in consumers' minds, nothing to making a decision to them anymore because it's just been so bastardized. And it's a shame because these critics really worked hard to get their name. And I feel very strongly that these producers really shouldn't be doing this type of thing because it's really destroying the credibility of the critic and of theater in general.
Damien, how important today, though, do you think that newspaper critics are?
I've seen, over the past month, I've seen 2 different research reports that just talk about how the value of consumer reviews are actually far outweighing critical reviews. And I think everyone in here, when you book travel, a hotel, and I don't necessarily make the comparison between a Broadway show and a hotel, but when you look at the things that you book online, I personally would rather look at 100 consumer reviews and see what the overall weight is of all of those consumers versus what a critic says. And I think that, and for what I feel like especially in the theatrical world, I feel like the value of quotes probably leans a lot heavier towards plays and the success of plays and what the critical review is. But I think once you get towards musicals, and a lot of the places where we advertise Broadway is it's such like a it's such a tourist-focused event. We really look closer at the consumer reviews to see what is the everyday person saying about the show. And I think one-offs, I'm assuming everyone's sort of in the same space of Amazon and all the different places that we look at. I personally jump right down and I say there's 100. I look at how many stars out of 100 people. It gives you a gauge of what you would believe is a more less biased view.
Where, Ken, then would you go to find quotes, consumer review kinds of quotes, if you're looking for something beyond what a newspaper critic has to say?
Well, first of all, just to reiterate what Damien said, I think he's absolutely right. The commission that you talked about being formed should also have a subtopic of what are we going to do about our diminished power over the last several years.
What are they going to do about their jobs?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. We think that these critics have the tremendous amount of power because we don't have economic models to withstand them. What happens is we can't wait often, especially off-Broadway, for word of mouth to kick in. We all know that and what Damien is describing, user reviews are just 2007 version of word of mouth. which flies a lot faster than it did 10 years ago. So, yeah, I'm a big the user review and getting as many people obviously in to see your show and talk about your show. And if you have an economic model in place, you can withstand, as my shows have done, withstand reviews that aren't that good. So I always look for the user. And I'm also not, with my first time, my latest show, I threw a big quote up above it that's actually from the show. Because, yeah.
Altar Boys.
No, my first time.
Your first, yeah.
It's a quote about someone's first sexual experience. It looks almost like a review quote, but it's not. It says, I remember I was pretty good at it. No, really. Like a little bit of a joke. Because what Joseph taught me is that what people want out of print or any sort of advertising is that story and that descriptive element of what the show is really about and how it appeals to them. So I try and get that in there. The best quotes for me are the long descriptive ones that describe the show.
Damien, there was an interesting fight that the producer Scott Rudin got into with the New York Times last year. The New York Times has a website in which they encourage readers to write a review of a show. And Scott Rudin was producing Year of Magical Thinking with Vanessa Redgrave. And he started quoting in the New York Times ads the readers' reviews from the New York Times website. And so he would say, I had a terrific evening, Joe Schmo, New York Times. The New York Times top editor who's in charge of ethics and legal standards there, I mean, the place is so top-heavy, no wonder its stock price is sinking. But this guy sends letters to Scott Rudin saying, you must stop this. This is wrong. These people are not of the New York Times. To which Scott Rudin said, you're giving them a forum on the New York Times website to review my play. Why should I not be able to quote them? Now, Damien, is that fair game?
That's a tough one. I know, and I saw it, and my gut just tells me if you go to NewYorkTimes.com and the review is there, no matter who writes it, I sort of understand Scott's point. Like I do get it. I mean, could it be seen as misleading? I mean, sure, but so is every quote in the paper. So, do you know what I mean? Like when you really look at it, that's a really hard one. When I saw that, we talked about it in our office for like a week because we just thought it was very funny. Really, how do you address that? That's a hard one.
He was being mischievous, I think, but I mean, there is a point to
yeah.
that.
He's saying you can't have it both ways.
Yes, exactly.
That's exactly what it said. Mischievous is a nice way to say it because I've worked with Scott for almost 12 years, and so I know Scott very well. But he does have a point. If the New York Times is going to publish a review from a consumer, in his mind, he has every right then to take that review and credit it back to the source. And that's his philosophy on it. And you can't really, you don't want to argue with Scott, because he is a genius when it comes to generating publicity and marketing his movies and his shows, and he has great taste. So you don't really, he's a smart guy who's been doing this long enough, and he's going to fight. He's going to dig in and fight for something like that.
I think you're all right about the diminished power of the critics. I mean, I think they themselves are aware of that. Once upon a time, this business, when Frank Rich was the drama critic of the New York Times, if he gave you a great review, you're pretty sure you were going to run for a while. And I think you often see with Ben Brantley now at the Times, he can give something a good review and it can sputter out fairly quickly. I'm curious, and you worked on a show that I liked very much, but I thought from the beginning it would be very, very difficult to market. And I'm curious to know how you finally figured out what to do and to turn it into the hit that it's become, and that's The Drowsy Chaperone.
Oh, you should join me in this one.
That's a play. I don't know if you've seen that play.
The Drowsy Chaperone is an incredible musical. Really smart and incredible word of mouth, and people love it. And the performances, it's new, it's clever. It has the worst title in the entire that you can ever imagine, and admittedly by the producers, it is the biggest challenge that the show has is how to get around that title. They had a really, really clever ad campaign that Spotco did that kind of played up in many cases what its biggest Achilles heel is. I'm sure you've seen them, things like The Greatest Show with the Worst Title Ever. I mean, really just trying to draw attention to that. The Greatest Show that your neighbor hasn't seen yet. Stuff funny, tongue-in-cheek, very much in the spirit of the show. Worked really beautifully. But the show is out on national tour, and on national tour you have a far more condensed period of time within which to educate the public about what the show is. Your advertising campaigns are much smaller, and it's still a challenge. I'm not exactly sure that anybody would say we've cracked the code on that show. The show has done incredible business by virtue of the fact that it is a fantastic show, and people love it.
I say we put buzz people in very early, and that's just sort of in the Kevin McCollum, and like they always sort of had that strategy of just putting, if it's a great show, put people in, and it's just if people are going to talk. And then the advertising role is you hope that there's automatically like a sort of a little flame that starts, and then the advertising just fuels it. Mm-hmm. But the show really is, I think, a fantastic show. And I think and I think the traditional theater base jumped all over it right out of the gate, which was good. And plus, it was 90 minutes,
like that.
90 minutes in the middle with a fantastic location in Times Square. It doesn't hurt either.
But they had a real problem getting it into the minds of tourists. You know, tourists really never picked up on Drowsy Chaperone as a choice. We've identified there's 3 really theater goers that you want to get. You want to get the tri-state local avid, you want to get the destination traveler, somebody who lives and builds a vacation around coming to see as many shows as they can, and then the casual tourist that wants to come to New York to see Statue of Liberty in a show. And Drowsy Chaperone still has not made it anywhere near their list. And that's some of the struggles that Ann's talking about on the road with it. Mm-hmm. They really have a tough time.
It has an insider feel to it.
Yep.
Very insider.
Still, though, I mean, it ran a year doing, I mean, it's certainly weakened now, but it ran a year with very, very strong grosses. I mean, it couldn't have just been this sort of core, show queen audience going to Drowsy Chaperone for that full year. It must have been something that kicked in on some level.
Well, you got your destination traveler. You got those people on it. And that's a pretty significant population that lives around the country that comes here yearly to see shows. It's just that casual tourist that really that they're into Les Miserables, Phantom of the Opera, etc. Keep those shows running, and it just never has ever cracked into their brain that this is an option to see because they can't figure out what it is. They don't have enough time. It's the whole education process. They just don't have enough time to get educated about something like Drowsy Chaperone.